February 2nd, 1943. The west bank of the Volga River, Stalingrad. The air is so cold it bites through wool and leather like teeth. Smoke hangs over the ruins in a low ceiling, smelling of burnt brick, cordite, and charred grain. Somewhere in the broken city, a single rifle cracks and echoes, then fades into the wind. But the main sound now is not gunfire. It is movement. Boots on frozen rubble, men calling out in hoarse voices, the scrape of field shovels, the clink of canteens, the surrender of an army. In a battered command post not far from the river, Soviet officers stand with pencil stubs and notebooks, counting prisoners in columns, trying to make the numbers look real. German soldiers, hollow-eyed and wrapped in rags, file past guards with submachine guns held at the ready. Many are too weak to lift their heads. They have the look of men who have run out of time, hours away. In Moscow, the Kremlin windows are dark except for a few pale rectangles of light. It is late. The city is muffled under snow. The streets quiet in the way capital cities become quiet when everyone is waiting for the next bulletin. Joseph Stalin does not sleep much on nights like this. He sits in his office, shoulders heavy under a plain tunic, pipe in hand, a map spread across his desk like a skin. The pins and strings are familiar by now. Red, blue, black, front lines that have bled back and surged forward. Names that have become prayers and curses. Voronezh, Rzhev, Rostov, the Don, the Volga. A clock ticks. A secretary slips in with another folder. A courier brings a telegram. A guard closes the door softly. Stalin reads without theatrics. He rarely shows it, but there is a way his eyes pause on certain figures, certain reports. The German Sixth Army has ceased to exist as a fighting force. A field marshal has surrendered. Hundreds of thousands are dead, wounded, or captured. It is not simply a victory. It is a statement written in blood. The Wehrmacht can be broken. Across the room, Vyacheslav Molotov waits with the posture of a man who learned long ago that silence is safer than enthusiasm. Georgy Malenkov sits with a notebook. A few other senior figures are present, but they keep themselves small, careful not to breathe too loudly in the wrong moment. Stalin taps ash into a tray. He looks at the map, then past it, as if seeing the next year already unfolding. His mind, always hungry for control, makes its first hard pivot. Stalingrad is not just a battle won. It is proof that the war has a direction now. But his face stays calm, almost bored. The men around him understand what he never says out loud. Stalingrad has changed the conversation. In 1941, it was survival. In 1942, it was survival with rage. In early 1943, it becomes something else. Calculation, a telephone rings. Stalin lifts the receiver, listens, gives a few clipped answers, then hangs up. His pipe glows as he draws on it, and for a moment, the ember is the brightest thing in the room. The reports on his desk are not only Soviet. There are summaries of British shipping, American production, Lend-Lease deliveries, tonnage, tanks, trucks, aluminum, canned meat, aviation fuel. Lists that look dull until you understand what they mean. The United States is turning raw materials into war faster than Germany can destroy them. Britain is still standing, still launching bombers into the night. The Red Army is learning, adapting, producing, bleeding and refilling. There is a moment, quiet enough that the men in the room might miss it, when Stalin stops being a man staring at a map and becomes a man hearing the machinery behind the map. Factories, railways, shipyards, oil fields, coal, steel. He has always understood force. Now he sees the scale of it in numbers that cannot be argued with. He glances at a production chart. His finger traces lines like a judge weighing evidence. Then, very softly, Not for the room, but for himself. He lets out a short, almost amused exhale. Molotov shifts his eyes. Careful. Stalin speaks at last. Voice low, rough from tobacco and long nights. He does not say, "We will win," as though it were a toast. He says something colder, something like a verdict. It is not a triumphant declaration. It is an acceptance that the balance has tipped beyond any single battle. The Germans have courage, discipline, and experience. Yes, but they do not have the weight. Not against 3 great industrial engines feeding one war. He looks up, and for a heartbeat his gaze pins the men in the room in place. The words are simple, and because they are simple, they land like iron. Germany cannot outlast this, not now. And in that instant, the focus changes. If victory is no longer a question of if, but when, then the real war becomes the war after the war. Borders, governments, armies that stay where they are when the shooting stops. The shape of Europe, carved not by promises, but by who is standing on the ground with guns and supply lines. Stalin stands, slow and deliberate, and walks to the map. The floorboards creak under his weight. He points at Poland, then at the Baltic, then down toward Romania and Hungary. And the room grows even quieter, because they understand he is not pointing at battles. He is pointing at leverage. In the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, German prisoners shuffle through snow. In Moscow, Stalin's pipe smoke curls toward the ceiling as he studies the future like a man measuring a coffin. Victory is becoming inevitable. Now he intends to decide what it buys. March 19th, 1943. The Kremlin, Moscow. Outside, the snow is beginning to rot at the edges, turning black where boots and tires have churned it into the street. The thaw comes slowly, but it comes all the same. Inside Stalin's office, the air is warm with tobacco smoke and the sour tang of paper that has been handled too many times. On the wall, the same map. On the desk, the same folders. But the tone of the documents has changed. The Red Army is not merely holding, it is pushing. The Germans have struck back around Kharkov. The front line still a living thing. But the shape of the war is different now. It is a contest of exhaustion, and Stalin is watching Germany's reserves like a man watching an enemy's wallet empty. A general stands at the edge of the room with a pointer, describing tank strengths, fuel limitations, the condition of infantry divisions. The language is blunt. Numbers, losses, replacement rates. Stalin does not interrupt. He listens with that heavy stillness that makes everyone feel as if they are being weighed. When the briefing ends, Stalin gives a small nod and waves the officer away. The door closes. Now the room is smaller, more intimate. Stalin, Molotov, and a handful of trusted men remain. They sit at the table with tea that has gone cold. And on the desk lies another kind of intelligence, a different front line, intercepts, diplomatic cables, reports from London and Washington. The second front. Stalin has been pressing for it since the first months of the German invasion. He has demanded it in letters that were half request and half accusation. He has used every casualty figure as a blunt instrument to force the issue open a second front in France. He says, and take pressure off the Red Army. Do not leave us to bleed alone. But now, in early 1943, something else creeps into his thinking. It is not that he stops wanting a second front. He wants it more than ever. Yet his urgency gains a new edge, not only military need, but political geometry. Because if the Western allies do not land soon, the Red Army will keep moving. It will move because it must. Because Germany still fights like a cornered animal. Because Soviet cities are still burning. But also because every kilometer westward is a bargaining chip that cannot be taken away by speeches. Stalin knows this. He is not romantic about alliances. He sees them as temporary structures built on convenience and fear. Molotov breaks the silence with a careful phrase about Churchill's latest message. The British Prime Minister is supportive, emphatic, full of language about shared sacrifice, but still cautious on timing. The Americans sound more confident, more industrial, more impatient. But they also have their own priorities: North Africa, Italy, the Atlantic. Stalin listens. His eyes narrow slightly, not in anger, but in focus. Then he speaks, almost conversational. If they delay, we advance further. The sentence hangs there. It is not a threat spoken aloud to London or Washington. It is a private understanding, the kind he shares only inside the walls of the Kremlin. Everyone at the table hears the meaning. The longer the Western armies remain on the far side of the Channel, the more of Eastern and Central Europe the Red Army will occupy by sheer momentum. And occupation is not a theoretical concept to Stalin. It is administration, police, railways, party committees, men with pistols, flags raised over ministries. There is a knock at the door. A secretary enters with another folder, and Stalin's gaze flickers to it immediately. Like a predator hearing movement, it is a production report. He opens it and scans the lines. New tanks rolling out of factories beyond the Urals. Aircraft production rising. Artillery shells counted by the millions. The Soviet economy is scarred, yes, but it is still breathing, still producing, and the war has forced it into a brutal efficiency. Then he turns to another sheet. Lend-lease shipments, trucks, radios, explosives, food, aviation gasoline. The numbers are substantial. Stalin is not sentimental about help, but he is not blind either. American trucks are moving Soviet guns. British and American supplies are filling gaps that would otherwise cost lives. It is not charity. It is advantage. He sets the papers down and looks at Molotov. They need us, he says, in the same tone you might use to state the weather. Molotov does not respond immediately. He does not have to. Everyone understands. The Western Allies can bomb Germany, can fight in North Africa, can plan landings, but the main German army is still on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union is the anvil. Without it, the hammer has nothing to strike against. Stalin's lips tighten for a moment. Almost a smile, but not quite. This is the part people never see in propaganda posters. Victory is becoming predictable, but it is not becoming simple. It is becoming a negotiation that will be decided by who can show up at the table with the most territory already in hand. Stalin stands again and walks to the window. The glass reflects him faintly, a dark shape against the snow outside. For a moment, he's quiet, staring at Moscow as if the city itself is a machine he must keep running. Then, still facing the window, he speaks in a voice low enough that the words feel private even inside the room. The Germans cannot win. The question is what the others think they can take. It is not a poetic line. It is a ruler placed against the map. Molotov shifts in his chair. Stalin turns, and now his eyes are sharp. We will not beg, he says. We will decide. He returns to the desk and taps the map with a thick finger. Once, twice, as if knocking on a door. Poland, Romania, Hungary, the Balkans, the route to Berlin. The men around him understand that he is already thinking beyond the current offensives. He is thinking of governments in exile, of partisan movements, of who will be allowed to claim legitimacy when German power collapses. There is a moment of silence where you can almost hear the gears turning in Stalin's head, grinding steadily toward an outcome. Then he sits, opens a new folder, and begins dictating a message. It is not a battlefield order. It is a diplomatic instruction, precise and cold. And as he speaks, the war outside the Kremlin continues to rage. But inside this room, the war has gained a second layer. The fighting is still about tanks and trenches. Yes, but now it is also about the future, and Stalin intends to arrive there first. July 5th, 1943. Dawn on the steppe near Kursk. The horizon is a thin red line, and the air vibrates with engines warming in the dark. Grass bends under the weight of tracked vehicles. Dew clings to gun barrels. Men crouch in trenches that have been dug and reinforced for months, listening as if the earth itself is holding its breath. Then it begins. A German artillery barrage rolls across the Soviet lines like a giant hand sweeping a table clean. Soil erupts, splinters of wood and metal whip through the air. The ground shakes so hard that teeth clack. In the smoke, silhouettes move. And then the panzers come forward. Black shapes with long guns, pressing into minefields and anti-tank ditches, grinding toward the Soviet belt. A Soviet captain grips the edge of a trench, knuckles white beneath his gloves. He has seen German attacks before. He has seen the way they punch through weak points and flood the rear areas with speed. But this is different. This is an attack into something prepared with obsessive care. The Red Army has built a trap, depth, layers, lines within lines, wire, mines, anti-tank guns hidden in tree lines, artillery pre-ranged on likely approaches. Above them, Soviet aircraft prowl the sky in pairs, hunting for columns, radios crackling with clipped call signs. The captain hears the first mine detonate. A flash, a bloom of dirt, a tank lurching as its track snaps. Then more, a chain of blasts. The German spearhead hesitates, bunches up, tries to push through anyway. A Soviet gun crew swings their weapon, sights trembling. The loader slams around home. The gunner breathes out and squeezes. The shot is a violent punch. The shell streaks and hits a tank's side armor. Metal flares. The turret jerks. Smoke pours out. Somewhere behind the lines, a Soviet artillery commander checks his watch, then raises his hand. He has been waiting for the exact moment the German armor commits to the corridor. He drops his hand. A wall of Soviet fire answers. Hundreds of guns, thousands of shells. The barrage is not random. It is math applied to death. German vehicles are hit, forced to halt, forced to cluster, and clustered targets are easy targets. This is Kursk, and it is not just a battle. It is a test of whether the Red Army has learned how to absorb a blow and then crush the fist that delivered it. In Moscow, Stalin reads the updates like a man watching a machine under stress. He does not rush to the telephone. He does not shout. He wants no surprises. Kursk has been prepared in a way he can understand. Layered defense. Reserves ready. The enemy forced to spend blood for every meter. Molotov sits nearby with dispatches from the diplomats. But for now, the war is in the foreground. Stalin's eyes scan casualty figures and reports of German armor concentrations. When a staff officer mentions that German elite units are committed, Stalin's face remains still, but his gaze tightens in a way that makes the officer's throat go dry. If they are spending their best here, Stalin says quietly, then they will have nothing left later. He does not mean later this week. He means later this year. Later in the war. Later in the political struggle that will follow the last battle. On July 12th, near Prokhorovka, the world becomes noise and fire. Two armored masses collide at close range. Tank guns fire into tanks at distances so short that the muzzle blast throws dust onto the enemy's armor. Steel screams as tracks tear and wheels shatter. Crews fight inside metal coffins that are turning into ovens. The air smells of fuel and burning rubber. Black smoke rises in pillars that blot out the sun. A young Soviet tank driver, face smeared with oil, feels every jolt through the chassis. He hears the gunner shouting. He hears the commander screaming over the roar. He sees a German tank in front of them, close enough to see the bolts and seams. And for an instant, it is not a war between nations. It is two machines on a narrow patch of earth trying to kill each other. Their gun fires. The recoil slams through the turret. The shell hits, sparks, and the German tank catches fire. flames licking out of the hatches. A figure tries to climb out, falls back, disappears. The Soviet driver swallows hard and keeps moving. This is not a clean victory. It is not elegant. It is brute force, multiplied by endurance. And as the days pass, the German attack loses momentum. The spearheads blunt, the casualties mount. The minefields and guns and reserves do what they were designed to do. And when the Germans finally begin to pull back, when their offensive collapses into defensive scrambling, a door opens. The Red Army steps through it. The Soviet counteroffensives begin with a methodical weight that feels unstoppable. Units surge forward, driving the Germans from positions that once seemed permanent. Villages change hands, bridges are seized, rivers crossed. The front line begins to roll west like a tide that has found its rhythm. In the Kremlin, Stalin receives the reports with a different kind of stillness than he had in 1941. That old fear, the fear of collapse, is gone. What remains is control. A marshal enters with news of breakthroughs. Stalin listens, then asks one question that is not about heroism or speeches. How fast can we sustain it? The answer is logistics. Rail lines repaired, fuel delivered, ammunition stocks, truck columns. He wants the arteries open because he knows what speed means now. Speed is not just tactical. Speed is political. Molotov brings another cable from the Western Allies. Plans, talks, promises. Stalin glances at it, then back at the map, and you can sense the shift inside him. He does not need to be convinced that they will win anymore. He's deciding how to manage the endgame. He leans toward Molotov and speaks in a tone that is almost gentle, but his words are heavy. The faster we move, the less we have to ask. Molotov nods once. Stalin's pipe glows again, and the ember looks like a small red eye in the smoke. Out on the steppe, the wrecks of tanks sit half buried in scorched earth, and the wind moves through them like a slow breath. Kursk has consumed armies, but it has also consumed Germany's last real chance to regain the initiative, and Stalin, watching the front line bend westward, understands something with absolute clarity. The Allies will win. Now his task is to make sure that when the victory arrives, it arrives on terms that favor him. November 28th, 1943. Tehran, Iran. The city smells of dust and gasoline, and the air carries the faint tang of wood smoke from cooking fire. In the streets, British military police and Soviet guards move with eyes that never stop scanning. American security men stand in doorways, hands near their jackets, watching every passing face. This is neutral territory in name only. Tehran has become a pressure chamber where the future of Europe is being squeezed into shape. Inside the Soviet embassy compound, the halls are heavy with carpets and guarded doors. Stalin has agreed to travel, a rare act for a man who usually rules from behind Kremlin walls. He arrives with a small entourage, his bodyguard silent, his expression unreadable, his mustache neatly trimmed as if to remind everyone that he is controlled even in the desert. Franklin Roosevelt is nearby, smiling, warm, drawing people close with ease. Winston Churchill is present too, sharp-eyed and restless, his mind always working in angles and contingencies. The three of them are now in the same city, and the world feels as if it has narrowed to a few rooms, a few tables, a few cigarettes burning down in ashtrays. Stalin sits and listens. Roosevelt speaks of unity, of shared purpose, of crushing Germany completely. Churchill speaks of strategy, of the Mediterranean, of striking where Germany is weakest, of caution and timing. Stalin nods at the right moments, his eyes moving between them with a patience that is almost predatory, because Stalin is not here to be persuaded that Germany will lose. That question is settled. Kursk has made it inevitable. The Soviet advances have confirmed it. The issue now is not defeat, but division. Who liberates what? Who occupies what? Who installs governments? Who writes the peace? In the conference room, maps are unrolled on a table. The Channel, France, the Balkans, Italy, lines drawn in pencil, arrows pointing toward beaches and rivers. Stalin's voice is low when he speaks, but it does not need to be loud. The room leans toward it. He wants the second front. He wants it in France. Not later, not after another detour, not after more careful maneuvering. He wants it because every month of delay is another month of Soviet dead, another month of Soviet cities in ashes. But he also wants it because he sees what delay would mean. If the Western Allies do not land in France soon, the Red Army will keep driving west, and Soviet influence will spread like oil through cracks in Europe. Stalin can almost taste the leverage in that scenario, yet he does not fully trust it either, because he understands the chaos of war. A stalled offensive, a German defensive line holding longer than expected, a political shock, a supply failure. He does not gamble when he can force. So he presses. Churchill bristles at the pressure, trying to hold on to his preferred plan of pushing through Italy and perhaps into the Balkans. Stalin hears that word, Balkans, and his eyes harden just slightly. He understands the British instinct. It is not only about defeating Germany, it is about blocking Soviet expansion. Stalin turns his head toward Churchill. "You speak of the Balkans," he says calmly, as if he is commenting on a chess move. "But the shortest road to Berlin is through France." Churchill shifts in his chair, cigar in hand. Roosevelt watches both men carefully, reading the room like a politician who has survived by sensing where power truly sits. Roosevelt, unlike Churchill, is willing to commit. He needs a clear plan that the American public can understand and support. He also needs the Soviet Union fully engaged, because he knows that without the Red Army, the war becomes longer, bloodier, and politically uncertain. Stalin sees this. He sees Roosevelt's position and quietly exploits it. He leans back, fingers steepled, and speaks with an odd softness. "We have done the hardest part," he says. "Now you must do yours." The sentence is not an insult. It is a reminder of scale. The Eastern Front has been eating divisions like a furnace. The Soviet Union has absorbed losses that would have shattered most states. Stalin does not ask for sympathy. He uses the suffering as currency. Roosevelt nods, and the conversation turns toward dates. Spring 1944. A landing in northern France. A clear commitment. Stalin does not smile, but the air around him changes. This is what he came for. Not because he doubts the Red Army's ability to continue, but because he wants Germany crushed from both sides, quickly, decisively. A fast collapse gives fewer chances for political surprises, fewer chances for separate deals, fewer chances for Germany to fracture in a way that complicates Soviet aims. And beneath the strategic talk, another set of negotiations is happening. Quieter, more dangerous. Poland, borders, the future of Eastern Europe. Stalin speaks of security, of buffers, of the Soviet Union's right to protect itself after being invaded twice in a generation. He frames his demands as defensive. But the men in the room understand that defense can look very much like control when it stretches across other countries. Churchill tries to push back. Roosevelt chooses his battles. Stalin watches, measures, stores every reaction. At one point, in a smaller conversation away from the main table, Stalin makes a remark that is not meant for speeches. He is speaking to his own men, in Russian, words that slip out with the ease of a man who has already accepted the ending of the war. "The war is decided," he says. "Now we must decide the peace." There is no triumph in his tone. There is only the sound of a man rearranging reality in his head. Later, Roosevelt and Stalin share a moment that feels almost friendly. Roosevelt jokes. Stalin offers a rare thin smile, but even that warmth has a calculation behind it. Stalin wants Roosevelt close, because he suspects Churchill will fight harder over Europe's map. Roosevelt seems more flexible, more focused on the United Nations and a post-war order that Stalin can potentially manipulate. In the corridors, guards shift their weight. Outside, Tehran's night air cools, and the city's lights flicker like distant signals. Stalin returns to his room and stands over his own map. Smaller than the one in Moscow, but no less familiar. He traces the line from the Soviet front to the heart of Europe. He thinks about railways, about armies, about party cadres waiting like seeds. He thinks about timing. Because the Allies will win, but Stalin intends to make sure the final shape of that victory is not an accident. June 23rd, 1944. Dawn in the forests and marshlands of Belarus. The air is damp, thick with mosquitoes and the smell of wet earth. Mist curls around pine trunks and clings low to the ground, hiding men who crouch in silence with faces painted in mud. Somewhere ahead, German sentries stamp their feet, trying to stay awake. Rifles hugged close. Then the horizon flashes. Soviet artillery opens fire in a roar so massive it seems to pull the sky downward. Shells scream overhead and detonate in German positions, tearing bunkers apart, shredding wire, collapsing trenches. The ground shudders as if the forest itself is being beaten. This is Operation Bagration, and it is not a push. It is a dismantling. Soviet infantry surge forward behind the barrage. They move in waves that do not pause, guided by officers with pistols and whistles, backed by tanks that grind through undergrowth and over shattered earthworks. Engineers run with mine detectors and wire cutters. Smoke grenades bloom in grey clouds, hiding crossings and forming corridors of confusion. German radios crackle with desperate calls. Units report being flanked, cut off, swallowed. Roads jam with retreating vehicles, then explode as Soviet aircraft dive. Cannons chattering, bombs tumbling into columns. Bridges vanish in plumes of fire. Command posts go silent. A German officer, face grey with exhaustion, stares at a map that is becoming useless by the hour. His lines are gone. His reserves are gone. His assumptions are gone. On the other side, Soviet commanders speak in calm voices over field telephones, telling divisions to keep moving, to bypass pockets, to leave encircled troops for follow-up units. This is the Red Army transformed, not just brave, not just numerous, coordinated, methodical, relentless, and the result is catastrophic for Germany. Entire armies are ripped apart. Cities fall. Minsk becomes a trap. Tens of thousands of German soldiers are captured. The front collapses in segments, then in slabs, then in a long, rolling crumble westward. In Moscow, Stalin receives the reports with a stillness that feels almost like satisfaction, but it is not joy. It is confirmation. He has been waiting for this kind of offensive since the first terrible winter. He has demanded a Red Army capable not only of holding, but of cutting Germany's heart out with operational precision. Now he has it. Molotov is nearby, but there are also other men in the room now. Diplomats, planners, party officials who will later become administrators in places that are not yet Soviet, but soon may be. Stalin listens to the casualty figures and the captured equipment lists. He watches the arrow on the map drive toward Warsaw, but his attention is divided because another front has opened at last. 2 weeks earlier, on June 6th, 1944, the Western Allies landed in Normandy. Stalin has received the news without celebration, without any overt display of relief. Inside, he knows it matters. The second front is real now. The Germans must split their attention, shift divisions, reallocate aircraft and fuel. Every German unit sent west is one less unit resisting the Soviet tide. Yet the landing also triggers a different calculation. If the Western Allies are in France, they will push toward Germany from the west. If the Red Army pushes from the east, the point where they meet will decide the political anatomy of Europe. That meeting point is a line that will harden into borders, into governments, into spheres of influence. And Stalin wants that line as far west as possible. He does not say it in speeches. He does not need to. The Red Army speaks it in kilometers. In the summer heat, Soviet units roll through towns where the German signs are torn down and replaced. Sometimes locals cheer. Sometimes they stare with guarded faces, unsure what liberation means when it arrives, wearing different uniforms and speaking a different language. Stalin's mind is already in those towns, not as a visitor but as a builder of control. Security services will follow. Party structures will form. Coal mines and rail hubs will be catalogued. The question will not be whether these places change. The question will be who changes them. By July, the Soviets are in eastern Poland. The Vistula River becomes the next great barrier, and Warsaw looms ahead like a symbol loaded with explosives. The Polish underground is restless, watching the Red Armies approach with hope and fear braided together. In the Kremlin, Stalin sits with another folder of political reports. Poland is a problem, not because Stalin cannot conquer it, but because Poland carries memories. The Polish government in exile in London wants a free Poland. The underground wants legitimacy. The West talks about self-determination. Stalin talks about security and friendly governments. He knows that a friendly government in Warsaw is not a slogan. It is a requirement. And then, in August 1944, Warsaw rises. The city erupts in gunfire as the Polish Home Army launches an uprising against the Germans, trying to seize the capital before the Soviets arrive, trying to make a statement of independence that cannot be ignored. Stalin watches this from the distance of power. Reports come in. Street fighting, barricades, German counterattacks, civilian casualties climbing by the day. Calls for help, appeals to the Soviet command, Western diplomats pressing for aid, for airdrops, for cooperation. Stalin's face does not change much as he listens, but there is a hardness in the way he holds his pipe. He understands what the uprising represents. It is an attempt to shape the post-war outcome without him. It is a declaration that Poland wants to decide its own fate. He does not respond like a man moved by sentiment. He responds like a man safeguarding a plan. The Red Army pauses on the far side of the Vistula, exhausted, stretched, its supply lines strained. That is true. But it is also true that Stalin has no urgency to save a political force that would oppose Soviet influence later. In private, he speaks to his circle in the same cold language he uses for all problems. "Let them exhaust themselves," he says. "Then we will see what remains." The words are not shouted. They do not need to be. Warsaw burns. In the West, Allied armies fight through France. In the East, Soviet armies grind forward with the weight of a continent behind them, between these fronts. Stalin feels the future tightening like a noose around Europe's old order, because the Allies will win. But now, with Germany collapsing and the map reshaping itself in real time, Stalin has moved fully into the last phase of the war, not the phase of survival, the phase of ownership. April 25th, 1945. The Elbe River near Torgau, Germany. The water runs brown and cold beneath a sky that looks scrubbed raw by smoke. On the eastern bank, Soviet soldiers step cautiously through shattered buildings, rifles up, boots crunching glass. On the western bank, American troops do the same, their helmets low, their eyes searching for movement that might still be German. Then, in the ruins by a broken bridge, they see each other. A Soviet lieutenant raises his hand. An American officer mirrors him. For a heartbeat, both sides hesitate, as if the war itself might be a trick. Then they walk forward, weapons lowered, and the men meet in the middle of history. Hands clasp. Smiles crack through exhaustion. Cameras click. Someone laughs in disbelief. Soldiers slap each other on the shoulders, trading cigarettes and patches like proof that this moment is real. The Allies have met in the heart of Germany. The map has closed like a fist. And far away, in Moscow, Stalin receives the report with the same controlled calm that has carried him through years of disaster and blood. He is in the Kremlin, night again. The familiar office. The same smell of tobacco and paper and ink. Outside, Moscow is alive with tension. A city that knows the end is near but does not yet know what the end will feel like. On Stalin's desk are the final shapes of the war. Berlin is being encircled. The Reich is collapsing. Hitler is in a bunker, still issuing orders to armies that no longer exist. German civilians are fleeing in rivers, wagons and carts dragging through mud. Faces turned away from the sound of approaching artillery. Stalin sits and listens to a briefing from a marshal whose uniform is dusted with travel grime. The marshal speaks of streets turned into canyons of rubble, of house-to-house fighting, of artillery firing at point-blank range. He reports Soviet losses in numbers that would have been unimaginable to other nations, but which the Soviet Union has learned to absorb like a body-absorbing pain. Stalin asks short questions. How many days? How many shells? How many bridges intact? He does not ask how the men feel. He assumes it. Then the marshal says the words that matter most. Our troops are in Berlin. There is no cheer in the room. Not yet. Not in front of Stalin. His circle has learned that triumph can be dangerous when power is present. They wait, watching his face for any change, any crack that might reveal what he truly feels. Stalin nods once, as if confirming a calculation that has been running for years. He turns to another matter immediately. Occupation zones, supply, command arrangements, what Soviet troops will do when they reach certain lines, and what they will do if Western troops arrive there first. This is the reality of the endgame. The war against Germany is nearly finished. But the war over Europe's shape has already begun. Molotov enters with new diplomatic cables. Britain, the United States, discussions of conference plans, of post-war administration, of reconstruction, of elections. Stalin takes the folder and reads without expression. He has attended conferences. He has made promises. He has smiled in photographs. He has also watched, with cold clarity, as the Red Army planted Soviet power into the ground with every advance. In Poland, in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Hungary, in Eastern Germany itself. The pattern is becoming familiar. Military command is followed by security organs. Friendly political committees appear, backed by armed men. Opponents are neutralized. First quietly, then openly. Newspapers shift tone. Police change hands. The word liberation remains. But its meaning is being rewritten. Stalin understands that this is how empires are built now. Not with crowns, but with ministries and party offices and control of borders. And yet, in his private moments, there is another layer to him, rarely seen and never shown to crowds. Later that night, Stalin stands alone for a moment by the map. The front lines are almost irrelevant now. Germany is a dying animal, and the Allies are already deciding how to divide the carcass. He takes his pipe, draws, and exhales slowly. A secretary brings in an intelligence summary of American industrial capacity and British political debates. Stalin scans it, then sets it aside with a small movement that suggests he is no longer impressed. He has already accepted what the numbers mean. The combined industrial power of the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States has become an ocean that Germany cannot swim in. Years earlier, that realization would have been a relief. Now it is simply the foundation of his next problem. He turns from the map and speaks to Molotov, who has returned quietly, standing near the door. The war is over, Stalin says. Though Berlin is still fighting, The war is over in his mind because the outcome is no longer in doubt. Molotov waits. Stalin's eyes narrow slightly, and his voice drops even lower. Now begins the struggle for what we have taken. Those are the words that define the moment. The private acceptance that victory has turned into something colder. Not celebration, not peace. Positioning. Molotov nods once, his face tight. Outside, somewhere in the distance, Moscow's air raid sirens do not sound anymore. There are no German bombers left to reach the city. The fear that once lived in every street has faded into memory. But Stalin does not relax, because he knows what comes next. When Germany surrenders, the Western Allies will want agreements honored, elections held, borders stabilized. They will talk about freedom as if it is a universal language. Stalin has his own language. Security, buffer zones, friendly governments. Control? In May 1945, Berlin will fall completely. Germany will surrender. The guns will go silent across Europe. And in the silence, Stalin will not hear peace. He will hear opportunity. He will hear risk. He will hear the beginning of another conflict, one fought not with panzers and artillery, but with influence, spies, political parties, and the quiet pressure of armies that do not go home. Back at the Elbe, the Soviet and American soldiers pose for photographs, grinning, holding each other like brothers who survived the same storm. They do not know the arguments that will soon harden between their capitals. They do not know that the lines where their boots stand will become the first seams of a divided continent. In the Kremlin, Stalin sets down his pipe and looks at the map one last time that night, his face unreadable. Germany is finished. The Allies will win. And Stalin has already moved on to what he believes is the true prize.